And we wanted to look at the growth in kids' achievement over the course of the pre-K year as a function of three ways of indicating quality. Okay, one was the near benchmarks, those kind of structural standards that drive a lot of policy. The other one was the early childhood environment rating scale, which is a kind of omnibus measure observationally of the kind of physical environment as well as interactions, and then something that focused only on the quality of interactions between teachers and children, which was the class. And so we compared these. It was a horse race. Which one accounts for gains in children's learning over the course of the year? And you see the summary up there. That interactions, again, matter. We find no association whatsoever between those structural features and the near index, again, which drives a lot of policy. People want to hit those benchmarks when they design programs and invest in programs. The early childhood environment rating scale showing some relation expressive language, but in point of fact, it really was what teachers were doing with kids that was really accounting for learning gains. And what was striking to us was that what we were able to observe in those four-year-old programs in terms of the effects of teachers' interactions in the four-year-old year, those effects were persisting into and through the end of the kindergarten year, regardless of the quality of the kindergarten program that the kid went to. So we weren't seeing that kindergarten year wash out those effects. And again, it was the instructional support, the kind of cognitive stimulation of children and language stimulation of children. And we also find that over and over that these qualities of interactions matter more for kids who come from tougher backgrounds, from more risky backgrounds. And so the kind of findings I just put up there, on average, we're seeing the achievement gap close by between 1/3 and 1/2 for some of those children in those programs, just as a result of those exposure, and that gap closes even more for kids who come from more difficult backgrounds. So let me just show you an example of this from first grade. We're looking at children's learning gains on the Woodcock-Johnson literacy test as a function of whether they sort into, again by accident, classrooms that we rated as low on emotional support, moderate, or high, for children who come from kindergarten with no problems, that the teacher says no problems at the end of the year, or kids who say teachers say there are multiple problems. The no problem kids look almost immune to the kind of environment that they're in kindergarten with respect to the gains that they make in literacy. But look at how sensitive those multiple problems kids are. Considerable gaps in the rate of learning gains under conditions of low emotional support and moderate. When those kids sort into classrooms where the teachers are rated as high on the qualities of emotional support that they provide to kids, they're learning at the same rates, regardless of the difficulty they had in kindergarten. Same thing for kids coming from high education backgrounds, mom with above a high school degree, or moms with a high school degree or below. We see those higher education kids coming from higher education backgrounds, again being immune to the qualities of instructional support that the teachers are demonstrating, and those kids coming from low education backgrounds, the learning gains that they make entirely dependent upon the qualities of interactions that teachers have with kids in that year. So what are the implications? So it's nice to say you can measure these things. It's nice to say they matter, but can you improve the qualities of teachers' interactions with kids, and what are the consequences of doing that? And so I want to just summarize that a little bit. So we've been engaged in the last 5 years really in designing and testing the impacts of professional development systems that are aligned, that target directly the qualities of interactions that teachers have. We kind of say if interactions matter, and we can observe them in a standardized way, then those indeed ought to be the targets of PD that we deliver to teachers. And that PD should be delivered in a way that is, in a sense, job embedded and job linked. And we think should, if you're going to focus on anything, you need to focus on the qualities of instructional interactions and make those classrooms more cognitive, make those interactions more cognitive. So we do this under the auspices of a program we call My Teaching Partner, where we've built a video library, a coaching model, and have now designed and tested a college course to improve interaction. I'm just going to walk very quickly through this, but this is an example of the video library where teachers can come and be facilitated in their interactions completely over the web, be facilitated in their interactions with video. I noticed, I mentioned before how important teacher sensitivity was for those kids who were likely to display off-task behavior. And you might say, well, what's an example of that? And so a teacher could go and get a very detailed example. And I will say, we go through great pains to be very specific in the language that we use to describe the interactions that teachers are having in these videos, because we want to align that directly with the instrument that measures those interactions. So that's the kind of resource that teachers can go and use on their own. And then we also have developed a cycle of coaching, entirely web-mediated, where teachers transmit video to a coach, whether that coach can be a local coach or can be a coach anywhere across the country. That coach analyzes that video in a very systematic and manualized way, posts that video to a private website that the teacher goes to. The teacher gets some feedback about their individual practices with kids in classrooms, and that cycle repeats itself over the course of an entire school year. We've built this and tested it in a randomized control study, comparing the coaching model with just the video library, and we find teachers with my teaching partner coaches significantly grew in the sensitivity of their interactions with kids. They increased their students' engagement with instruction, and we saw noticeable increases in teachers' language stimulation techniques over the course of the year just through this coaching model, and that children in classrooms whose teachers were receiving coaching, okay, made significantly greater gains in tests of early literacy and demonstrated far fewer problem behaviors over the course of the year. So what we're seeing here is a way in which we can observe practice, we can coach around practice, practice improves, children's learning improves. I tell this to my grandmother, and she kind of laughs at me that this, of course, that's just common sense. But in fact, it's not easy to do. And so these are just examples of the kind of curve that we see, the progress that teachers make when they're under the coaching condition in terms of the observations of their sensitivity. And again, here, progress that they make in terms of observations of their language stimulation techniques. So just to summarize, as I said before, we see that teachers who do receive this coaching show greater increases in quality of instructional and other interactions. Children show these gains in tests of early literacy and reductions in problem behavior. Interestingly, when we go into that group, we didn't see many effects, as you'll notice, for that group that just went to the video library, that just was using the video library. We're learning a lot about the real needs that teachers have to be scaffolded into a resource like that to use it appropriately. But one of the things we did look at was for teachers who were only exposed to that video library, that's the only thing that they had. If they happened to be an early career teacher, somebody without a lot of experience, those teachers actually who went to the library, who had very little experience, showed gains over the course of the year. So we have some indication that that modeling that occurs might be important for them. We also show that these assets, particularly the coaching, matters more for teachers who are teaching in higher poverty classrooms than lower poverty classrooms. In fact, we see dramatic increases for teachers in high poverty classrooms. Without those kind of professional development supports, we actually find decreases over the year in the qualities of teachers' interactions. It's as if their capacities erode over the course of the year. And so some of the implications for policy and program, clearly interactions matter. I think there's lots of room to begin to think about how we focus regulation and training on teachers' interactions with kids. We have a number of different measures. Ours isn't the only one, but there are several measures that can be used in the context of quality rating and improvement systems and other form of regulation and state support. These interactions can be measured at scale, reliably and validly. They can indeed improve and are sensitive to aligned professional development that in turn produces gains for kids. But from our standpoint, the fundamental challenge here is how we embed in the systems of early childhood and the regulation and supports that we have around that standardized metrics for teachers' practices in classrooms. That those are going to be what ultimately allow you to drive improvement, and that once those are in place, one can begin to design systems to incentivize aligned and targeted professional development that is actually effective, rather than incentivizing a lot of activities for teachers that really don't seem to matter to them. So, thank you very much.